Good morning, everybody. Welcome to week 9. Today we're talking about research papers and how to do them. Research papers are an interesting animal in kind of academia because even though there are tens of thousands of undergraduates in various fields, the official goal of a research paper is to find out something that no one has found out before. And so that can become a little tricky. And so I'm going to talk today about how we can do that. All right. The lectures are going to start to get a little shorter. All right. As we go, and the reading is about to drop off completely because we're going to be basically spending the last month hitting writing hard. So here we go. Today we're going to talk about CARS. All right. CARS is a writing model that comes out of the University of Michigan that has been adopted by people all over the country as kind of the perfect way to think about research papers. CARS stands for Creating a Research Space. All right. And what it is, it's a method of organizing research papers and also building introductions in a way that really forces you to come up with a new idea to say, or at least attempt to come up with a new idea to say. So CARS has 3 basic moves, all right? And I'm going to touch on each of those basic moves, but I'm also going to show you how each of those moves works in one of the 3 major types of academic disciplines. So we're going to do a visual art paper, we're going to do a social science paper, and a physical science paper. All right, and so each move I'm going to have different things to explain because I'm going to show you how each move works with different types of disciplines. So, in short, what CARS is about is establishing the boundaries and the parameters of your research. All right. Ultimately, like I said, you want to do something that no one has done before. So CARS is essentially about, and this is giving a little away, but that's all right. But CARS is essentially about finding that one thing that no one has researched yet, the small little niche that no one has thought of yet, no one has talked about yet, and talking about that one little thing. All right? So, move 1 is establishing your territory. This is the outer boundaries of your paper. It discusses the importance of your research. It makes generalizations about the subject. All right. And most importantly, it reviews previous research. All right. When you're researching something, you want to acknowledge, all right, that people who have acknowledged part of those things before, all of those things before, etc., etc. So you are establishing your territory. So in other words, what you're doing with move 1 is saying, here is the area I'm talking about. I'm not going to talk about anything outside of it, but within the scope of my research, this is it. All right. So let's look at a social science paper, all right? And I'm looking at something that would be, potentially sociology, potentially cultural anthropology, all right? And research on alternative family structures, all right? So why would this research be important, all right? And notice I don't have a thesis yet, all right? Because I'm looking for my thesis. I haven't found it yet, all right? So what's the importance? Well, as more and more children are raised in non-nuclear family models, how will this impact future generations? Right? The traditional American nuclear family is one father, one mother, and 2.3 kids. That is changing drastically. It's also not the norm in many places in the world. And so, what I want to know is, as the different types of family models emerge, what's the impact? All right. And then I talk about generalizations on the subject. These are things that are not true, or let me rephrase that. These are things that might not be true, but are considered true. They could also be true, but they're things that are considered true, but that you might be, calling into question. Conventional wisdom says that 2-parent households have been more beneficial to the well-being of children than 1-parent households. That's a pretty firm generalization in research on families, on nuclear families. And then we say there's previous research, and I say, all right, a lot of people have done research on the traditional nuclear family, on single mother families, and then about on same-sex families. Two women, two men, blah blah blah. All right. So there's a lot of research about those things. So in social sciences, I have defined my parameter. I have looked. I've started to poke around to see what other research says, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in a physical science paper, right, it looks very, very similar. It's just remember that the data is a lot more strict in terms of what we call evidence, right? So in physical science, I'm going to do something with biology. I'm going to say the research in the genetic variables of addiction, right? And so I say, all right, why is this important? Why should we study, genetic addiction? And I say, as addiction continues to ravish a sizable minority of the world's population, understanding the causes of addiction, including potential genetic components, is critical. All right? So I make some generalizations, I look at the generalizations, and I say, all right, a lot of people say that genes are a factor in whether a person is likely to become an addict or not. And then I look at previous research and I say, you know what? There's research on the genetic variables of addiction that have been done on fruit flies that have had their genes manipulated to test for alcohol addiction. All right. So I say, all right, so this research already exists in this area, blah, blah, blah. Finally, a humanities. All right, this is a kind of literature communication type essay. The monomyth theory is applied to video games. The monomyth is also called the hero's journey. It's a form of structuralism in English where we basically say that all stories follow the same kind of basic structure. Right? And then we say, well, what's important? Well, as video games become a greater share of how stories are told in the world, we need to understand how gamers react to the stories in video games. Generalization. Gamers have concerns for a game beyond that of being a story. So in other words, having a story can be pretty important, but so is gameplay, so is the beauty of the graphics, et cetera, et cetera. And then I say previous research. Well, monomyth is a very, very, very popular literary theory, and it's been applied to stories in a variety of mediums, from plays to novels to films. So in other words, there's lots of kinds of stories that we've already really analyzed with monomyth. All right, so that's our, I disappeared. I'm back. I'm upside down. I'm right side up. Okay. I'm move 2. This is the second move. So we've established our boundary, and now we're going to establish our niche. We're going to look for, the specific thing within the boundary that we're going to talk about. All right. Often, not always, but often, this move is based off of some disagreement with results, or, and this is my favorite, a gap in the research. All right. So in other words, you've looked at all the research in your boundary for move 1, and you've looked at it and you say, something like, there's a chunk of research missing here. Like, they've researched all this other stuff, but there's something missing right here. And then that's what you want. You want to be like, oh, I found the missing thing. Now I can research it. Or someone has come up with research results that you disagree with, that you think you can invalidate. And you say, all right, I'm going after those. I'm going after that. I'm going to invalidate these other research, and I'm going to say this is what's actually wrong. This is also could be true of invalidating generalizations, right? So in other words, you could start with a generalization and then say, a lot of people believe this, but actually this is totally wrong, right? So you hope to prove some research invalid. There's some area of research that has not been rigorously tested. That's the gap. Another big one, there's a new technology or new mediums that have not been analyzed yet, right? Every 10 years, astrophysicists have to rewrite everything they do because we invent a better telescope, and the better telescope gets us more accurate data, and that more accurate data has to be interpreted, all right? And so we are constantly in astrophysics having to refigure out everything every time we invent a new telescope. So that's new technology. A new medium. Social networks were not really existing 15 years ago. So what can we do with social media in terms of this? New information that has not been considered. We discover something new. We discover a new species in biology. We discover, a lost manuscript in literature. So a discovery that no one has put into the mix yet. All right, so Going to our social science essay, this is the essay on addiction. All right. Here are some potential things I could do. Now that I've established my boundary of alternative family models, I look around the research and I say, all right, here's some things I could do. I could make a counterclaim. I could say that previous research on traditional nuclear families is biased in its treatment of traditional gender roles. So in other words, I might say, you know what, all that research that's been done on traditional families, it's wrong, it's off because we had a preset notion of like what was important. Or I could find a gap. Remember the research I said last time, there's been lots of research on traditional families, on single mother families, and on same-sex families. Not nearly as much on single father families. So I say, all right, I found the gap, I found the problem. I'm going to research single father families. Or I could raise a question. Is research about nuclear families conducted the same way as research about non-traditional families? So in other words, I might look at all the research, and I might look at the research done on traditional families and the research done on single mother families, and I might say, look, there are problems here. The research has not been done in the same way, so you can't compare the results. Or I could continue a tradition. I could take all of the research methods that have been used to research nuclear families, and I can apply them to like co-op living, like where multiple families live in the same basic place, and I can apply that. So lots of things we can do. All right, counterclaim, gap, raise a question, carry on a tradition. Let's look at our physical science paper. This is where we're talking about the genetic variables of addiction, and I might make a counterclaim. I might say that genetic testing has actually not found a specific gene that deals with addiction. So I could say that maybe we're on the wrong track even looking for one. I could find a gap. I could say, you know, we've done genetic testing on, alcohol addiction, on drug addiction, but no one has ever done genetic testing on a non-physiological addictions like gambling. All right. And so maybe I say, all right, I'm going to do one on gambling. I could raise a question. I find out in my research in those fruit flies, and I say, all right, that gene that they messed around with to like change the addiction tolerance of alcohol in fruit flies, does it work on other chemicals like nicotine? In other words, is the gene that causes alcohol addiction the same one that causes nicotine addiction? Or I could continue on a tradition. All right, could genes be manipulated to make us addicted to good habits like exercise or studying? In other words, could I undergo gene therapy and at the end of it, I would become addicted to exercise and in theory might become healthy because of that? That's a big ethical question too, but still, science is asking. Finally, move 3 in a art style paper like our humanities monomyth paper. I could make a counterclaim. I could say that due to the fact that video games are interactive, stories and games do not follow the monomyth format. So that's a counterclaim right there. I could find a gap. Monomyth has been applied to tons of other mediums of storytelling, but never gaming, so I'm going to look at gaming. I could raise a question. Are games that follow the monomyth format more popular than those that are not? Right? So in other words, like if I acknowledge that yes, some video games use, not all, but some use the monomyth structure, can we learn anything by saying, is this like more or less important, powerful? All right. And then finally, monomyth theory, continuing a tradition. Monomyth theory has been applied to books and films and novels and plays, and so we should apply it to video games as well. Our third and final niche is occupying or our third and final move is occupying that niche. All right. In other words, you find the question and then you do all the research necessary to answer the question, to fill the niche. All right. What this does is it outlines the purpose and research of your study. It lets you narrow down on a really specific thesis. It's where you state your findings and it indicates the structure of the argument. So the third and final move looks something like this, right? In our social science paper, we decided we were going to look at alternative family models. We looked around and we said that we found a gap. in the research with single father families. And so I say, all right, the purpose of my study is to investigate if children from single father families are comparable to those of single mother families. All right. And I have a thesis. I come up with a thesis that I'm going to test in my research. And I say that I believe that children in single father families are roughly comparable in terms of rates of future success to those in future mother households, in single mother households. And then I come up with the structure of my research, right? I say, all right, so I'm going to define the methods of research that were used on single mother families. I'm going to apply those exact same methods to single father families. I'm going to show the results of the research on single father families, and I'm going to compare that research to research of single mother families. So this allows us, all right, to build the structure, right? Because it tells exactly what, once I have my argument and I have my thesis, all right, I use all that information from move 1 and 2 to kind of explain what I have to do to like prove my thesis. Here's our physical science paper. Research in the genetic addictions, genetic variables of addiction. The purpose of my study, well, I'm going to see if the genetic markers that show a low tolerance to alcohol in fruit flies also shows a low tolerance for nicotine, or if every addiction has different genetic markers. Right? So my findings, I'm going to say, here's what I think the thesis is. Genetic manipulation giving fruit flies a low tolerance to alcohol does not offer low tolerance to nicotine as well. In other words, another way to say this would be that genetic manipulation shows that every addiction has different genetic markers. All right. So I make the structure of my argument. I define all of my terms. I highlight studies on the genetic investigation to investigate alcohol tolerance in fruit flies. So I go back to that study and I explain that study and what they did. I conduct the same kind of manipulation, but I test for nicotine addiction instead. I analyze the results, and I compare those results to the alcohol study. All right? Again, I found my niche, and then I fill it. In our MLA style paper, our art literature paper, monomyth theory is applied to video games. I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to show that games that follow the monomyth format are more popular, right? Than those that do not, which shows that the importance of kind of monomyth is still valid. So what am I going to do? My thesis says that games that follow a monomyth format are more popular than those that do not. And then I outline my argument. So I say, all right, I got to define the monomyth format. I've got to define what makes a video game popular. Then I apply the definition of monomyth to various games. I apply the definition of popular to the same games, and I correlate all of my findings. All right? So that's it. And I want you to notice how these three moves, establishing a territory, establishing a niche, filling the niche, occupying the niche, they're a way for us to figure out what the hell we're going to write about and what our thesis is going to be. But it's also a way of explaining, all right, how we came up with that thesis and what we're going to do about it. All right. So that's it. Now you are writing let's face it, a strange little paper. The visual analysis essay is kind of half research and half analysis. All right. And that means that, you will subconsciously go through these three moves, right? But very, very quickly, all right? You're basically, these three moves are finding the image and then deciding what the image is about. And then you've got the other half of the paper that's just analyzing the image. So this lecture is largely for your future use. So in other words, when you're a junior and senior in college and you start to take your high level classes in your major, this is something you really want to remember and enact. I hope you have a great week. Let me know if you need anything.